Hey, and welcome to Inside Rugby. If you haven't been here before, my name is Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan that's living in beautiful Cancun in Mexico, and welcome. It's great to have you here. And for everybody that watches my videos on a regular basis, thank you very much for your support with my channel. It's always great to have you here, and I look forward to reading all of your comments below this video. Now in this video I'm going to be talking about the appointment of Rassie Erasmus as the Springboks coach as we go forward into 2024. G'day everyone, I hope you're doing well. I thought I'd make a short video about Rassie Erasmus taking over the coaching role of the Springboks, although we all know he played a very important part in that 2023 Rugby World Cup series for South Africa, and what a great job him and Jacques Nienaber did. And Jacques Nienaber of course has moved on to other things, and Rassie has been given the role as a head coach, and I thought it might be a good time to make a video and talk about this, and also to get your opinions on it, because I'm sure there's going to be plenty of opinions flying around. But I just wanted to share some of my views around this particular topic, because I think it's really interesting. And of course, as a Kiwi neutral, I'm very interested in what happens with the Springboks as they go forward. Now let's put some context into all of this, and we've got another 4 years to wait until we get to the next Rugby World Cup, which is going to be in Australia in 2027. So what does Rassie do between now and then? Because there are a couple of things that he needs to address to continue the potential success of the Springboks team when it comes to World Cup rugbies and tournaments. So the first thing is, I think he's got to look at his group of players that he's currently got and ask the question, okay, how many of these guys are going to probably have to move out during this particular cycle? And that's going to be a very difficult thing to assess, because if we have a look across the current crop of Rugby World Cup players from this year's squad, we find some interesting statistics. So if we look at the 35 players that were involved in the 2023 Rugby World Cup for South Africa, 22 of them were involved in 2019's Rugby World Cup. So that means that those players have obviously gone through that 4-year cycle, and some of them, quite a few of them, are actually in their 30s now. Now we all know, with current training, nutrition, recovery and all the science around sports training, we see players going longer and longer in their careers. But I think Rassie is going to have to make some interesting decisions before we get to the kickoff of that tournament in Australia. And there's some of the players that want to go to Australia who may not get there as far as South Africa goes, and there might be some other players that decide to call it on their careers between now and then. The only one that's done that so far is Duane Vermeulen, who's decided to retire after this year's Rugby World Cup. All the other players at this stage have decided to go on with their careers, and even Siya Kolisi, who's going to Racing 92 in France, has decided to make himself available for Springbok selection in the near future. Now Rassie has said himself in the press in the last few days that we need to address the depth in the squad in certain positions, and I thought that was quite an interesting comment, because if we have a look at some of the players who may be getting on in age and may not have another World Cup cycle in them, then Rassie might have to have some tough conversations with them. And I start off in the locks with Eben Etzebeth, and he's got to be one of my favourite players on the planet at the moment, and not just because of what he's done at the Rugby World Cup this year, but over the years he's been an absolutely fantastic player for South Africa. And I always have that part in my memory now of him when he went to New Zealand to play against the All Blacks this year at Mount Smart Stadium, and his father passed away during that time, and it was a very difficult, well, I'm assuming it would have been a very difficult time for him and his family. And you know, he stayed on there, and he played that game, and it was obviously in memory of his dad. And a very special person is Eben Etzebeth. So to see him going again would be absolutely amazing. But I think Rassie might have some interesting calls around that. And if we have a look at who's played the most minutes for South Africa across their careers so far, the list is pretty interesting, and I've put some together here, and Etzebeth is actually number one in terms of minutes played for the Springboks. He's played 7,697 minutes for the Springboks throughout his career. Next up is Willie Leroux, who's played 6,362 minutes. And then Dwayne Vermeulen, who's played 5,444 minutes. Damien Dialande with 5,433. And Sia Klesi next with 5,102. So those players have really put in some time for South Africa, and as you can see in Willie Leroux and Eben Etzebeth, they've really got up there as far as number 1 and 2 go in terms of minutes played for the country. Now, it's not as though South Africa doesn't have a lot of depth in their rugby, and if you look at the URC at the moment, there's a lot of South African talent playing in the URC this year, and a lot of those guys are just looking for their opportunity to play on the big stage. So I think Rassie is probably going to take his time. He can afford to take a year and just have a look at some of the players and how they're playing, and see where the potential talent is in some of the younger players as well, and then also assess what's happening with those over 30 and how they're actually going. And I think the biggest thing is not so much their age, but in terms of the number of injuries that they've had. And if you look at someone like Kalesi, who's in his 30s, but he's had some serious injuries, and whether or not that's going to impact his career over the next 3 or 4 years is going to be a significant thing. And I think if you look at Peter Steph du Toit, he's another one. Even though he's in his early 30s, he's had some serious injuries in his career, and that may be something that Rassie has a look at in terms of going forwards, because it's not just the depth of the squad or the experience of the squad, it's actually who can turn up and actually endure another World Cup cycle. And we've seen this year in this year's Rugby World Cup how important that whole fitness and being injury free is critical to the success of some of the teams. And we had the situation, of course, with Malcolm Marx for South Africa in this year's Rugby World Cup. Now, of the current squad that played in France, 20 of those players are over the age of 30. Now, again, I'm not stressing that age is a big determinator here, but combining age with a lot of other factors in terms of experience. And if you look at someone like Dion Fourie, who started his international career at 37, and he's obviously not going to be around for another World Cup cycle. Well, I wouldn't think so. So there's situations like that that you need to take into account as well. So it's a very interesting situation for Rassie. He's also got 9 players in the current squad that are either 28 and 29 years old. So arguably those players are going to be at their peak when it comes to the next Rugby World Cup in Australia. You've also got the younger players like Grant Williams and Kanan Moody, in their early 20s, and they're going to be phenomenally good when it comes to the next World Cup. And also Rassie's going to be looking at what positions those guys are going to be filling. So he's got these next few years to have a look at how they play in certain positions, and whether the likes of Kanan Moody ends up in the centres or whether he ends up going back to the wing. Those are the sorts of things that I think Rassie will determine over the next couple of years. So looking at that situation with Eben Etzebeth, it's quite interesting, because you've got the likes of the Viking and R.G. Schneemann, who's under 30 years old, and he's obviously a tip, and he played exceptionally well in this year's Rugby World Cup. I was super impressed with Schneemann and how he played in open play in particular. Some of those offloads he did were absolutely beastly. But in the locking positions, Rassie's got people like Lou de Jager to look at, and Salamat Moriat, if that's how you pronounce it. He's a long-term option for this team as well, and a potential captain of the Springboks going forward. So I think Rassie's going to be looking at these types of players as the next generation of players to come through for Australia 2027. Now in the centres you've got Damien Dialande, who's 31 years old, so whether or not he makes it to the next cycle will be interesting to see. But you've got the likes of Lucano Arm, Kanan Moody and Andre Esterhazen, all under 30 years old. So these young guys are obviously going to be in very, very peak form, and it's sending out a bit of a warning to the rest of the world rugby to think that the talent that the Springboks have in depth is pretty scary, and I don't think they're going to have any issues at all finding a fantastic team for Australia in 2027. But these are decisions that Rassie is going to have to make along the way, and I'm really interested in particular from my South African viewers, what do you think Rassie is going to do in terms of his strategy now heading into the next 4-year cycle for the Rugby World Cup? Do you think he's going to take a year to have a look at what actually falls out, whether some of these players do end up retiring? don't forget, some of these guys in their 30s, they might have a really big injury in the next 12 months, and it might put a question mark over them in their own minds and what's going on in their own lives, whether they're going to make it to Australia in 2027. It also gives Rassie an opportunity to have a look at how all the players across the URC and other leagues are playing, and seeing whether there's any young talent out there that he can fill in these certain positions. So I think it's going to be a really, really interesting period for South African rugby and this transition. I think Rassie has to be careful, because there is always the danger of holding on to some of these players for a little bit too long just because of their experience. And we know in particular at Rugby World Cups how critical and how useful it is to have these players that have experienced it and been there and done it. But I think we're getting to that interesting stage in South African rugby history now where there's a number of players 4 years out from now, where are they going to be exactly? That's going to be a really, really interesting question for Rassie to answer. So yeah, let me know what you think on this one. I'm really interested. Do you think we're going to see some more retirements from some of these older players in the next 4 years? Do you think that's a real likelihood? And do you think Rassie's going to bring in some young guys and really give them the opportunity from the get-go as South Africa starts to play some of their international games early next year? That's going to be another interesting thing to witness. So yeah, it's a very interesting period. I'm excited. I think Rassie is a fantastic coach. You can see what he's done with this South African squad. He's really got the right DNA, hasn't he, to be a coach of the Springboks. He brings this group together like no other, and his success speaks for itself. So you've got to give a lot of plaudits to that. So I'm excited for what is going to happen with South African rugby going forward. I'm going to be very excited to watch Rassie's journey over the next 4 years, and by the time we get to the next World Cup in Australia in 2027, I'll be able to make a video in response to this one and say, well, this is what he did and this is what happened. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that journey. So there we go, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think, and don't forget, if you like my rugby content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything at all, and if you can give this video a thumbs up, it helps the YouTube algorithm and all that sort of stuff. But more importantly for me, leave your comments and tell me what you think. I read all the comments. I'm really interested to think what the global rugby community here is thinking out there, and that's what my channel is all about. So I really, really appreciate it. Okay, that's the end of the video. I'll be back again soon with more content here on Inside Rugby with Mark. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, stay safe, stay well everyone, and bye for now.